So as we come to this study in the Gospel of Mark, I love the Gospel of Mark. It's really the study I preach at most churches where I do interims. I go back to it again and again. It's never exactly the same. But as I come to Mark, the reason is, and it's for the very reason of what we just worshiped, there is no higher name than Jesus. He can still the anxious heart. He can bring peace into the most chaotic situations. And he can transform lives. It is all about him. It's all because of him. It's all for him. And it's all through him. Brother, thank you for that, right? Because it is. It's not about our strength and how good we are. It's about our need and how broken and how weak we are and how his strength is made perfect in us. So much of what I'll be looking at as we go through the Gospel of Mark is thinking through, what does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to be a disciple? What does that look like? And you know, people have different answers to that question. What does it mean to follow Jesus? Some might think it's really a set of rules, right? That becoming a Christian is being religious and adopting a whole bunch of rules of things that you do and do not eat or do not do, or even the clothes you wear. You can tell based on someone's tradition what particular denomination they may belong to, because that's what following Jesus may look like for them. Others may think it's more of kind of this emotional, cultural response, right? You have that church camp experience. You're on that spiritual high, that mountaintop, and it's like, oh, this is so great. And then the rest of it's just, life is just difficult, right? And so people will often kind of just feel their way through following Jesus. And that's great when you feel like you love Jesus, but not so great when you don't feel it. So I think my answer to that question of what does it mean to follow Jesus, I try to keep it simple. And this is really what I think it's all about. It's a matter of just conforming your life to the character of Jesus as the scriptures portray him. Many, many years ago, and in fact I have a sermon on this later, you have that "What would Jesus do?" that became real popular. But what I want to ask is, what does Scripture show that Jesus did? And how can I do likewise? Right? So knowing Jesus or following Jesus is becoming like him. And the only way we know what he was like is by looking at scriptures, by studying the gospel and seeing him on display, how he reacted or acted, how he treated people, and how he communed and met with God. So as we begin this study through the Gospel of Mark, it's not going to be every chapter and every page. We're going to hit a number of high points as we follow Jesus through Mark and see one particular way that Jesus responded and how we might follow his example. So look with me in Mark chapter 1. We'll be looking at verses 40 through 45. And it says this: "A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, 'If you are willing, you can make me clean.' Now Jesus was indignant." I don't like that word. I don't think that's the best translation. Jesus was filled with compassion. He reached out his hand and touched the man. Sorry, I said translate. It was on my mind. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately, the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded you for cleansing as a testimony to them." And instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. So I want to walk through this passage and want to unpack some things. But first thing I want us to do is look at this man. He's desperate. He's in a desperate situation. He has an affliction, and that affliction is leprosy. Now, in the first century, leprosy was a term that was used to describe a number of various kinds of skin diseases, such as dermatosis, psoriasis, burns, suspicious baldness. That's my favorite. Is all baldness suspicious, or just certain kinds of baldness? And then the worst kind is white leprosy, where they have patches of skin that are devoid of feeling. Leprosy is caused by a bacteria. It creates lesions in the skin and destroys the peripheral nervous system, and so it causes a loss of sensation. So part of what will happen with lepers is they don't have feeling in their hands or their feet and other places. And so if they get cut, they don't know that they're cut, or other type of things like that. And it can also cause kind of a tissue degeneration, and sometimes their fingers and hands can become deformed, sometimes their noses and ears. It's not a pretty thing. So what happens in this context, especially in the first century, and you got to read Leviticus. Leviticus is probably the least read book of the Bible, but I find it incredibly enjoyable. It is so much fun to read. All the little details in there. But what it says about when you have something, like if you have like a little patch on your skin, or a spot that has a different color hair or something like that, you're supposed to go to the Levite, the priest in your community. And the priest is then to examine. And in fact, it even lists the types of things to look for, whether this is a long-term thing, a not long-term thing, if it's dangerous or not. And the priest examines, and if they determine that they have leprosy, the priest will declare them unclean. So only the priest can declare a person unclean or clean. And what happens is once you're declared unclean, it changes everything. And that uncleanness is, they were socially rejected. Because once the priest detects the leprosy and pronounces that unclean statement, they're immediately outcasted from society. They were quarantined because they imparted ritual uncleanness, and not because of any worries about it being contagious. While it is possible for some forms of leprosy to be contagious through long-term exposure, it wasn't a matter of were they afraid of it spreading to others, but rather it creates ritual uncleanness or defilement. And so just by contact, they had all kinds of things that would cause this type of uncleanness, but leprosy was one of those that meant you had to pack up and get out of your house, get out of your town. You had to live in the fields and along the roadways, and you could not have any contact with another human being. Now, sometimes lepers would group up into little colonies, but for the most part, they lived a very isolated existence. They were called living corpses, dead man walking. They were forbidden to touch any non-leper, and it was forbidden for anyone else to touch them. Rabbinic writings indicate that one should not pass within 4 cubits to the east of a leper. I don't know why they're that specific. Within 100 cubits when the wind was blowing. Now, a cubit is a measurement that's essentially from the tip of your middle finger to the base of your elbow, about 18 inches. So lepers could not get any closer than, what is that, 6 feet from another person. And you couldn't pass by the east. And if the wind was blowing, it had to be 100 cubits distance. One rabbinic writing tells of a certain rabbi, whenever he would see a leper, he would start picking up stones and throwing them at him and saying, "Go to your place. Go to your place, you unclean one." And they were required to stand a certain distance away, and when anybody was coming toward them, they were to cry out, "Unclean, unclean," so that they wouldn't get any closer. So they had to warn people, "Stay away, I'm unclean." So they have a physical disease, they're social outcasts, but then to add a little bit more difficulty to it is, although the Bible doesn't say you have leprosy because you're a sinner, in Jewish culture and in some of the rabbinic writings, they believed that leprosy was the result of God's punishment for a hidden sin that person had. Often, they would connect it with the sin of slander, which, if that was the case, there would be a lot more people in churches with leprosy. I did say that jokingly. I don't believe that. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia, it's called Zararat. And it's seen as a disease that God inflicts when people break his laws. So they look at certain Old Testament examples. Miriam, who spoke against Moses because of his Cushite or Ethiopian wife, that God struck her with leprosy. Joab, David's general, was cursed with leprosy because of some things that he had done. Gehazi, a servant of Elijah, who, because of his sin, he was struck with leprosy. Uzziah, the king of Israel, or king of Judah, took on some priestly roles and was struck with leprosy. And so what they do is essentially they look at all these examples where there's people that were struck with leprosy, all of them, most of which were healed after a short period of time, not all of them. But all of them were seen as, you're getting what you deserve. Whether you know what they did wrong or not, they see somebody with leprosy, they think that person is under the judgment of God. They deserve it. And one of the things that we see in this text is his desperation. Look with me again in verse 40. A man with leprosy came and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Look, there's no telling how many years this man had leprosy. We have no idea. We don't know his name. We don't know when he got it, how long he's had it. It could have been a year. It could have been 15 years. It could have been longer. We don't know. We just know that because of something that happened as a result of a skin disease, his life was forever changed. We don't know if he was married or if he had kids. But when was the last time he might have been able to kiss his wife or hug his children? How many times as he's walking along and he so desperately wanted to be around somebody, but he had to say, "Unclean, unclean." Or the sight of him sent children screaming in terror and other people yelling at him and throwing rocks at him. How many times did he cry himself to sleep at night? But he heard about Jesus. He heard that this man was unlike anybody else, who could heal, who brought sight to the blind, who could make the lame walk again, who showed love and compassion and could do something that nobody else could do. He heard Jesus, and in his hopeless, depressing existence, he had hope. And he knew that Jesus could help him. And he breaks the rules because he's supposed to stand far off, but it says that he came and he fell on his knees before Jesus and he cried out, and probably with tears and sobbing, "If you are willing, I know you can heal me." Think about what he asked here. There's a couple things. First of all, when he says, "if you are willing," I want to point out the humility of that. Because he's not making a demand. He's not saying, "Jesus, do this for me right now." He's not even saying he's expecting that Jesus would heal him. He purely puts it in the hands of Jesus and says, "if you are willing." But then I want you to notice the statement of faith. Pay attention to this. In fact, if you read all of these healing stories in the Gospels, you'll notice that so many times Jesus will say, "according to your faith." Or the centurion who asked for healing and said, "No, I don't have to go. You don't have to go with me. You just say the word and I know my servant will be healed." And Jesus said, "I've not seen such faith in all of Israel." Faith in Jesus. And I don't mean just saying, "I believe in Jesus." I mean recognizing that he is able. Because he doesn't question what Jesus can do. He doesn't say, "Can you heal me? Could you possibly try to help my situation?" He says, I know that you can do it." He recognized and believed in Jesus for something that sometimes his own disciples had a hard time with. He had faith. The question was Jesus willing to do it? That was the only question he had. Then we look at Jesus' response. Look with me in verse 41. "But Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. 'I am willing. Be clean.' And immediately the leprosy left him." Now, I just want to take issue with the NIV. I don't have any problems with the NIV. Bible translations are just that. They're translations. I don't know why it uses the word indignant, because it almost sounds like he's angry. "Fine, I'll heal you," whatever, right? That's really not a good translation of the word, because I think of indignant, I think of somebody who's mad, right? No, the word in Greek, I don't always like to do this, and the reason is, because people are like, "Yeah, keep using the Greek." The reason I don't like to do it is because I don't want to give the impression that the only way you could ever read and understand the Bible is if you learn the original language. I would love for you to. Be happy to teach you. Not today. But it makes a difference. So the word there is splagniste. It's really one of my favorite words. Why? Because it's fun to say. Splagniste. It's from the verb splagnizo. Splagnizo. It's a great word. It's just splag, right? It just has this anyway. The noun form is splagna. Love you, brother. It means your guts, your innards. King James translates it as bowels. It's your insides. Splagna, your insides, your guts. Splagnizo is a twisting of your guts. The word for compassion. Compassion. Jesus was not indignant. He was moved with compassion for the man. The English word compassion comes from the Latin. I bet you didn't know you were getting this morning. But it's a compound word that com is Latin for with, and passion means suffer. So the word compassion in English means to suffer with someone. Put it another way. When Jesus saw the man, he didn't pick up rocks and go, "Get away from me, you unclean person." He didn't kick him when he was down. He wasn't grossed out or revolted by the man. He felt for him. It is that twisting of the guts when you see somebody in a bad situation, hurting and broken, and you feel it so deeply you want to do something to help. It's not just feeling sorry for someone, it's being moved to try to help them. Hope for this man in a way that nobody else had. That's what he does. He looks at us with love and compassion. He feels for us. He knows when we're hurting. He knows what we've been through. He knows when we're down. He knows, and he's not unmoved by it. And then he did something that broke the rules. Because you can't touch a leper. It would make you unclean. But what did Jesus do? It says that he reached out his hand and touched him. Said, "I am willing, be clean." Y'all, why did he touch him? Sorry, I get a little excited. Why did he touch him? He didn't have to. We have a number of other healing accounts where all he did was say a word. All he said was, "Be healed, see, walk." He didn't have to touch him. Why did he? Because I think Jesus knew the power of what it meant to feel a human touch. And who knows the last time he had any contact with somebody. You see, touch matters. We need it. Whether it's a handshake, a side hug, or a full-on hug, there is something so healing and accepting about touch. People that maybe don't fit in, don't feel like they belong, it's amazing what a touch will do. Jesus touched him and then said, "I am willing." And I don't want to gloss over that. Because he was willing. He saw the man in his plight, he saw him in his situation, and the man's like, "I know you can do that if you want to," and Jesus is like, "I want to. Be healed." He didn't have to do it. There was no reason that he had to do it. He wanted to. And when he touched him, and my guess is there's probably some physical deformity. Clearly, maybe some patches on his skin. But with one touch, and listen, the reason why you're not supposed to touch him is because you become defiled. But what they didn't understand was Jesus cannot be defiled. He is the holy author of life. His touch makes others clean. And so that leprosy just vanished away. And then Jesus gives them a warning. Why? So you got to understand the context here. He says, right, see that you don't tell anyone about this, right? Show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices Moses commanded you as a testimony to them. This is important. What Jesus is doing is not just interested in bringing physical healing or even emotional healing. He wants to restore this man back into society. He wants to restore him relationally and publicly with others. And the only way you could do that is to go to the priest, because it's the priest who's the one that declares you unclean, that marks you, that you're an outcast. But it's the priest who also declares clean, and with that declaration, fully restored back into society. And so what Jesus is telling him is, you've been healed. Now go through the steps. Bring the offerings commanded by Moses. Go through the steps. Show yourself so you can get that pronunciation of clean. But a man did, as probably any of us should expect. He didn't. Why? Because his life had been forever changed by an encounter with Jesus. And so he went and started telling everybody what they had done. Perhaps they saw him. Perhaps they knew who he was. Perhaps they knew that he was a leper. And now his skin is as smooth and clean as a newborn baby. And he's well and he's back and he's so excited, because what happens is, and this is why I will never guilt trip somebody into sharing the gospel. No, I'm not going to beat you down and say you better share your faith. You know why? Because if you have an encounter with Jesus, you can't help but tell others about it. Because it is life-changing. And so he started spreading the word, and what happened was people started coming from everywhere to be near Jesus. So much so that he couldn't go into the cities because of the crowds pressing around him. So he had to kind of go out to more remote areas, which will set the stage for next week's sermon in chapter 2. So what do we do with this? You know, the reality is most of us will never encounter somebody with leprosy, even though they're there. But it's even not the same today. Leprosy is not the death sentence it once was, but even in severe cases, it's different, and most of us won't ever encounter that. But I do think we do encounter social lepers. Here's what I mean. You see, there are people that are social outcasts. They're lonely. You know, as a pastor and as someone in ministry, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the homes of a widow or somebody in a nursing home, and they spend every day by themselves. And no one calls. No one comes by. And they're lonely. You don't even have to be a senior adult shut in your home to be lonely, because there's people that are lonely all around us. They might have their acquaintances and their work friends, but deep down inside they feel alone. They feel like nobody is really there for them. Even in marriages, loneliness is a thing. There are those that don't seem quite normal, right? Doesn't mean that they aren't normal or what. Normal, there's a Christian author that had my favorite title of a book, Normal is Just a Setting on a Dryer. What is normal? What is that? I've yet to meet a normal person. But what do we mean by that when we say someone's not quite right? What we mean is there's just something a little bit off. They don't quite fit in. There are those that are insecure. They have deep insecurities. They feel like they're a mistake, that they have nothing but problems, that people don't like them, never will like them. They live with these insecurities. There are people that may not smell so great. There are people that may not dress so great or look so good. There are people with substance abuse problems. There are people who live in poverty, the bad part of town, bad because it's low income. There are people who have been abused, ignored, taken advantage of. Not for anything that they have done, but what others have done. Those have been told that you will never amount to anything. Those who have been told that their presence is not welcome. Sometimes they've been actually told your presence isn't welcome. But there are times where we just send those signals to people and they pick up on them. I'll never forget, I was pastoring, I was in my early 30s, and I was pastoring in North Carolina in a little country church. On a good Sunday, we had maybe 50 people for this little farming community of 200. And I went to this like associational pastors conference thing, and I try not to sound negative of a lot of people in my profession, but sometimes a lot of ego gets in the way. And we're kind of milling about, greeting one another, talking, get to know one another. And there's this group of guys and myself and so-and-so's like, well, how many go to your church? It's like, well, we got about 200 in Sunday school. Oh, we got about 500. And they're just talking, and then they turn and look at me, and they go, well, how about you? I said, well, on a good Sunday, we have 50. And in that moment, I saw it. They looked away, they looked at each other, and they proceeded to continue talking to each other and never made any contact with me again. Never even looked at me. I didn't matter. Church. See, we sometimes give those messages to people. We don't want them around. We don't want to talk to them. They're not welcome. Social leprosy is a thing. I don't know anyone else that calls it that, but it works here. There are also people that cry out, unclean, unclean. Warning people, stay away. Stay away from me. Right? Nobody could love me. I don't belong. I hate myself. Right? People create defense mechanisms. Perhaps they've been hurt too much. Perhaps they've been through too much. And they create these walls and these defense mechanisms. And I have found that sometimes the most difficult, cantankerous people I've known are some of the people that are hurting the most. Once again, when I was pastoring this little church, there was a lady that sat in the back row. She was an older lady, Esther. And every Sunday, I kind of walk around and greet people. And every Sunday she was sitting there with the expression on her face of just having eaten a bag of lemons. And I'd say, hey, Esther, how you doing this morning? And she'd go, it's too cold in this room. Right? And she always sat right by the thermostat. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry. And she was just that way. And I noticed nobody else really had any contact with her. She was there every Sunday, like clockwork. People would say hi to her, but she was not the most friendly person you'd ever meet. She had a very kind of a stern, frowny face. And one day after the service, she met me at the back door of the church, and she said, I want to talk to you. And I thought, oh no, what have I done? Can you come by my house after lunch today? So I did. I went to her house, and she met me at the door, and she said, well, you know how you're always talking about your past? And I'm like, oh no. Yeah, but I'm sharing how Christ has changed me and its redemption. She said, no. I want to share my story. She proceeded to tell me her life story. A couple times I felt like I needed to pick my jaw up off the ground because I'm like, oh my goodness. I had a rough life. She made some bad decisions. And other people reacted badly to her bad decisions. Okay, I'm not going to tell you all her stuff. That's her stuff. And she said to me at one point, she said, but when I did that, I went to church, I loved Jesus. Why would I do that? And I said, well, loving Jesus is no guarantee that you're not going to sin. We just talked. And you know what was interesting is after that day, she was like one of my best friends. I spoke to her ladies group. We did all kinds, she was just a sweet lady. But she had a hard, difficult life. And I have found that people sometimes that are the hardest to get along with are the ones most in need of being accepted. They're almost like, I like to think of them as a cactus. You don't see it, right? But maybe if you go up for a hug, the spikes come out. They're keeping people away. Whatever it may be, for whatever reason, they know they're standing. They know what other people may think or say. And even if people aren't thinking and saying those things, they believe they are because nobody is telling them otherwise. And they are everywhere. They're in this community in Hammond. They're at your workplace. They're certainly at Walmart. I gotta realize I gotta stop using Walmart as a negative example. It's really a lovely store. It's always interesting. But they're in your families. Maybe a child, some other relative, maybe a parent. They're in your homes, and they're in churches, including people who are hurting. What should we do? Those outcasts. Well, I think we should follow Jesus' example. People around us are desperate for love and acceptance. People need to know that they matter and that people like them and that they're accepted. This is why we like to do potlucks, because you can't eat with somebody if you don't like them. Well, I guess you can, but you shouldn't. Right? Be aware of who they are. Be aware of them. And extend a compassionate hand of love to them. Be like Jesus. Reach out, even if they've made mistakes. Reach out with compassion. Show them who Jesus is by our lives. And it may be unpleasant, and I'll tell you why. Because people may be difficult. No, they are difficult. They may be dirty. They may be diseased. But they desperately, desperately need you. Join with me in prayer. Lord Jesus, you loved us when we were unlovable, knowing full well all the bad choices that we may ever make, knowing the things that others have done. Lord Jesus, you could have walked by, but you loved us. You loved us enough to go to the cross for us, to cleanse us, to make us whole, and to continue to clean us as we travel this life. Lord Jesus, give us your eyes to see people. See them as you see them. Give us the ears to really hear them. And Lord, let our hands be your hands to bring healing and wholeness. Lord, there may be people here who feel hurt, outcasted, or like they've made too many mistakes. Lord, I pray that today they would encounter the almighty, powerful grace of God that takes what is weak and broken and makes it whole and strong. We ask this in the name of Jesus.